Thank you, Sarah. So good morning, everyone. Some of the themes that we've observed in FordRock and that I've observed through this conference so far are definitely around customer centricity and around experience for customers, and that often includes personalization. So if we look on the next slide here, one of the themes that we have observed around in the auto industry is personalization, right, and the customer experience. So a couple of quotes here that you see on your screen. The first one is from Gartner, and they're talking about not just personalization, but hyper-personalization inside mobility services. So whether we call it new mobility or smart mobility, right, he's saying both inside and outside of the vehicle, it's going to be a key competitive differentiator for auto OEMs. Another quote comes from a KPMG survey that was done this year that says 85% of automotive executives agree that this digital ecosystem that's evolving here is going to generate higher revenues for automakers than selling the hardware of the car itself. So I think that from what we've seen in FordRock over the last year and what I've heard at TU here in Munich and also in TU in Detroit earlier this year is kind of a consistent theme. And what we want to talk to you about today is how digital identity is going to be an underlying strategic enabler for all of these different pieces of new and smart mobility.
Great. So I think we all agree that this is the trends we are facing. Now, we've asked ourselves what companies have gone through this transition before. So who do we need to look at and where can we learn from what others have done?
So taking a quick look at the telco industry and at the smartphone industry specifically, here's a story just from November 2nd, so very recently. And we see here that Apple over time has actually now started to make more money with their services than they are with actually selling the hardware devices. So it's a trend that we've seen in the phone industry. And here on the next slide, we've actually see that what's a common thing that they've done to bring that experience to their customers, right? In Apple's case, it's Apple ID. And so here, the underlying digital identity that Apple provides in their ecosystem gives you the ability to sign on with one ID, whether it's to your iPhone, whether it's to iCloud in a browser, or whether it's to your iPad, and have a consistent experience across where you take a picture with your phone and it shows up on your iPad or it shows up, everything's synchronized, and you get that single experience. And a major part of that is digital identity.
Okay, so, but we all know the Apple story and we've heard this example many, many times. So maybe we look at a company from the automotive industry that has been disrupted much earlier than the OEMs.
Yeah.
So let's look at a company called TomTom. Most of you will know it. A few years ago, 100% of the TomTom revenues came from shipping hardware devices. Today, that's only a fraction of the revenues TomTom is generating. So today, TomTom is generating revenue by providing services, by selling subscription services to end customers. So you can subscribe to speeding camera detection, to different maps, all kinds of other fancy services like navigation on golf courses and navigation in big cities. But they are also selling services to companies like Apple or like Uber. Yeah? And so TomTom has been going through this transitioning from a hardware-based company and now being a purely software revenue-driven company. It's providing these services out of what they call the MyDrive Cloud. And we are very proud that FordRock Technology is providing the identity and access management piece out of here. So let's come back to the auto industry and let's look at the different challenges and how we can enable, or how identity enables solving those.
So mobility as a service is one of the things that we've heard about this morning and yesterday throughout the conference. It's definitely a common theme that we've observed. And we think that if you look at the center of this picture here, that circle represents monetized services. And if you look at the pieces around it, those are essentially industries that are going to be involved in, excuse me, we heard a couple of minutes ago in a previous presentation that each one of these things, the final decision that a consumer makes about whether to purchase something or what to do or where to go may be actually, in fact, in the vehicle itself. So the ability to make payments through the vehicle, usage-based insurance in the vehicle, subscribing to features that auto OEMs may want to offer, where you have a vehicle physical platform that can act differently based on what you're subscribed to. Maybe you're subscribed to an extra 100 horsepower, which is all controlled by the computer in the vehicle. Entertainment, knowing the back seat, who's driving, who's in the passenger seat, being able to see your Netflix or any of your cable subscriptions, advertising, and so on and so forth. But what's a common theme here? In order for the promise of new mobility and smart mobility and mobility as a service, we need identity at the foundation of that. We need digital identity so that we know who's sitting in the driver's seat, so we can attribute that usage-based insurance. We know who's in the back seat, so we can use their account for their cable services, their entertainment. We know who's driving, so we can have our targeted advertising and subscriptions follow us along. So key point here is that identity is going to be an underlying enabler for all these mobility services.
Okay, so that's about identity in the car and
Yes.
identity around customers. So if we go beyond that and look a bit further ahead, what else do we need? Or what else do we see coming along?
So the concept of relationships, I think, is big and very important in identity relationships, not just how you view them, but how they're actually persisted from a technical standpoint. So, excuse me, you're going to have all different kinds of digital identities that you need to manage within a smart mobility ecosystem, whether it's the identities of the people in the car, of the dealerships, the identities of the car itself. All of these different pieces of identity information are not going to be so useful in silos. They need to be interconnected together so we understand how they all fit together to actually deliver that experience that is the promise of tomorrow. So identity relationships, very important. So on the next slide here, this is a demonstration that we have at our booth out back, and it's kind of showing how we're using identity relationships to tie things together. So you can see the little sliders here of what someone has permissions for a car that they own and that they've shared with someone else. And we have a couple different scenarios here just to give you a little flavor of that. So on this next slide, we have I think it's one to many. Yep, one driver, many cars. So on the left side here, we've got the identity of 4 different vehicles, and they're linked together with these grants that say what someone's allowed to do in the car. We've got the identity of the owner. We've got the identity of the key that goes along with the vehicle. And actually, this one driver has access to these 4 different cars. Now, in another simple example, if we go to one car and many different drivers, here we have the blue dot of the car in the middle, and these lines are kind of hard to see on the screen, but we've got these orange circles with all these different drivers who have different access and different authorization to that car. Some of them might be able to have more horsepower, some of them might be able to open the trunk remotely, and some just might be able to drive. Some may have speed restrictions and so forth. But tying all that information together with relationships is key.
Okay, so this is something that we've built over the past month. So let's look at the challenges ahead that go beyond this year.
Yes.
But this year is essentially laying the foundation for
That's
everything
right.
that comes, right?
So one of the things that we've been working on within FordRock is we've been in a learning mode for the past year on around how everything that we have been successful with in the industry and financial services and insurance and retail and government applies into the automotive industry. And so we have joined and been participating in a group called Automotive Grade Linux. It's run under the Linux Foundation, and it's essentially about having a common, it's an open baseline of an operating system, in this case for the head unit or the IVI, that OEMs can build on top of. So we've started with that, and we've built an identity layer of FordRock software in a prototype that runs at the edge, that actually runs in the vehicle, that allows a user to authenticate to the vehicle, whether it's with a smartphone or facial recognition or what have you. So we have a low friction, easy way for a user to get into a vehicle and be recognized, so you know who's there in the driver's seat and who's there in the passenger seat. And so that's what our demonstration is based on, and that's where we've began our learning and continuing on in that area.
So talking about edge, talking about identity management, access management on the edge.
Yes.
What are we doing there?
We've been looking at, of course, the broad scope of identity for the Internet of Things, and of course, our supposition here is that the car is a rolling IoT ecosystem, each and every one of them, with connected devices and sub-ECUs and ADAS systems and the cluster and the IVI. All these different systems within the car need their identities as well. And so we've been looking at that, and we've actually believed that security is the other side of user experience, and identity sort of sits right at the middle of that. So on the one hand, you want to give your users a low friction, easy, good experience with your brand and the ability to do things without having to log in 10 times, for example. On the other hand, you need a good amount of security. And we need security and identities for these devices as well. So we need a secure and trusted identity of the car as a whole IoT ecosystem. We need trusted identities of the subsystems in the vehicles themselves so that we know that it's the right version of software, it's the right type of device for entering autonomous driving at the level 4 or 5. So not only do we want to be able to understand the identity and trust of the users who are in the vehicle, but the identity of the vehicle itself, and to tie those together into the relationship. So this is what we're looking at with Edge Security that we're getting ready to ship in about a month.
Great.
So take that out to the future, and what are we even doing further beyond that? Another big theme that we've observed here at these conferences and talking to many of you is around vehicle to cloud. So it's not just the security of the trusted identities, but how do you attribute all of the data that's coming off of the vehicle to those identities of the cars, and who's actually able to see that data? So having a piece of identity software running at the edge in the vehicle and communicating to the cloud backend software will actually allow us to tag data that's coming off of the vehicle so that we can then control who gets access to it. You may want to monetize some of the data that's coming off of the vehicle. You may want to share it, but you also will need to protect the privacy data. Now that we're attributing an actual person who's in the vehicle, we know who's there, and that's attributable to how they're driving and where they're driving and when they're driving. There's great privacy implications. So being able to pre-process data at the edge, tag it so that when it's in the cloud, we can have fine-grained authorization, another thing that identity management provides, so that when some API is coming in to request that data to make utilization of it, we can say, you can have these 4 pieces, which are fine, but not this piece, which is privacy sensitive, and not this piece, which is intellectual property sensitive to our company. So being able to understand the identities of where this data comes from and how it's tagged and control access to it in the cloud, another thing that we're able to do, and also some pre-processing and intelligence at the edge, because we're not going to be able to take every single bit of data and offload it to the cloud in order to make decisions. A lot of decisions are going to need to be made in real time in the vehicle, and so we're looking into that in our roadmap as well.
Right. This is one of the things that I'm really interested in, where I see a tremendous benefit, because right now what I see is that we ask for consent. So
yes.
We sit where the consumer consents in giving data. We send that consent somewhere into the cloud, and the entire in-car, out-of-car data we also send to the cloud, and then we process it there. So conceptually, it makes lots of sense to have this done in the car and take data where consent from people is being
Absolutely.
granted. Yeah. So this is the consent dashboard that we have today. But as we said, today it goes to the cloud as well as the data, which is being then processed to the cloud. So in future, people could manage their trusted devices, manage their privacy and consent settings right in the car, and attach the data that is being produced in the car where they manage their consent.
And I'll make another plug for relationships here. When we think about GDPR compliance and anything to do with privacy, how do we know how that all links together, the data that's coming off of a vehicle that was connected to a user and their privacy preferences, and when they say, you're able to use this to market to me, yes or no, or I need you to delete all my data and the correlating data that's down from the car, when we're able to link at a technical level in a graph type of structure, all of the different identity data and have that linked to the actual data, the deep data, if you will, the big data, so that we know where it is and who it's attributed to. Now we can have a much more pragmatic approach and systemic approach to achieving privacy-related compliance.
Great. So let's look at one example, Lisa here, and let's look at the impact of identity throughout Lisa's stay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is basically looking at, from a business perspective, this could be any company. We've chosen one, a German auto OEM. The idea is, how does this make an impact across your business? Because in reality, every company has many different silos of IT systems that will either produce or consume some bits of identity information. But our theory is what's needed, and what we've seen in helping our customers throughout other industries is this blue label that you see across the bottom here from the ForgeRock platform, is that we're able to connect to all those different silos of business processes and IT systems and have a single identity system of record, which ultimately ends up in more security, better privacy compliance, and a better user experience. So if we look at Lisa here, who is an employee first of BMW, now we're talking about identity management from an enterprise perspective. So this is how does Lisa get her identity provisioned, and she have single sign-on within the organization. If someone else is a customer and Lisa happens to be serving a customer, how can she sign into the systems that she needs to help them from a help desk perspective, customer relationship management, and so forth. So we make that connection. That's handled within our ForgeRock identity platform. Now, if we move on to the greater customers and devices piece, right? Now there's a whole bunch of other interesting things that we can fill in. So first of all, how do we start interacting with Lisa as a customer of BMW in this case? So what is the experience of her first coming on board to a website and maybe doing a social authentication, social registration, very easy, doesn't have to fill out a long form so that she can shop for vehicles and maybe build her dream vehicle, right? And then that transitions to her physically going to a dealership and then maybe giving a little bit more information and buying the vehicle and having some information about her already known so it's easy for her to move on through the process, right? So it starts at the dealership. But now we're moving on into the next piece after we connect that, which is managing your profile in the cloud. So identity management, another piece of it, is all about giving the user an easy way to manage their preferences in the cloud so that when they get into a car, regardless if it's one they own or not, those things can follow them around and they can have a great experience. So everything from associating your Spotify account ahead of time to any of your subscription services, payment information, and so forth, we can allow the customer to manage their profile from their mobile device, their tablet, their browser, what have you. The other thing is, what about connecting into services, right? So whether it's Drive Now, Park Now, or any of these connected services that are around, do we want the driver and the customer to have 10 different IDs for every different service? No, we want that to be integrated, and we want the data about what their preferences are from the dealership to their online shopping experience to follow them there. So single user experience across services. And then finally, all of that ends up in the vehicle itself. So whether she gets into a vehicle that she owns and drives every day, or whether she's using one of the services that we see to the left, as she gets in and authenticates to the vehicle, again, using either facial recognition or a smartphone or a key fob, now all of the data that we have from the left moving all the way back to the right can come in and enhance her experience and her passenger's experience, whether she's in a car that she's driving for 5 minutes or whether she's in one that she owns within that ecosystem. So this is what we say about identity being a strategic competitive differentiator, because it's actually going to allow an OEM or any business basically to understand their single customer as a person across the different lines of business, across different M&A, across all those things to give that experience, but also to provide security.
Great. So if we sum up in very few words what we've heard, and if we look at where do we innovate our products and where do we develop our products further. So the one thing that we are very passionate about is personalization.
Yes.
So we want to create a personalized user experience. At the same time, we don't want to compromise security.
Right.
And we are not talking about security in terms of consumers or customers. We talk about edge security, about vehicle security and IoT security.
And one thing I forgot to mention when it comes to vehicle security, I mean, this is about how can we have vehicle-to-vehicle communication in a trusted way so you know it's coming from the car that actually says it is. How can we trust a vehicle to a smart city, smart parking, smart traffic light? All of that, being able to have trusted identities in that ecosystem is very important to be able to trust those identities of devices and how they're connected with people.
Right. And once we have that, we've got the relationship component,
yes,
which enables our customers to manage this entire ecosystem of identities, of consumers using applications, using devices, knowing other consumers, but the same is true for the IoT relationships.
That's right.
That sit underneath there. And because this is all related to sensitive data, of course, privacy is a very strategic initiative that we drive. And I think that's it for the day, yeah?
Those are the big things. We have a booth just out back here where we have a demonstration where we can show you more details. The bottom line, identity and its proper use and implementation is going to be can be a strategic differentiator for your company. So thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
We're out of time.
Bam.